Hello everyone, this is Yusuf from Crafting Clouds. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about a concept that for me personally, when I first started into this space and understanding how to deal with programming and logic and stuff like that, loops was quite a confusing concept for me. I don't know if it is for a lot of you, but I felt like it would be helpful for those who don't understand loops completely and how they work specifically in Method CRM. So let's begin. Um, so I'm gonna use an example of how a loop behaves in Method CRM. Now, this explanation is more of a general, explanation of how loops would work. In general, loops are the same, more or less, across all platforms. But I'm going to be speaking in the context of Method CRM and how loops work in Method CRM. And I'm going to be comparing two loop actions that are used commonly in Method CRM. The first one being loop through table, and the other one is loop through grid. And we're going to discuss when's the right scenario to use each one. So let's begin. Let's talk about loops. I'm going to use the example of a buffet line. Okay. So this is a diagram that I created to kind of hopefully help understand how loops work in Method CRM. So this section here is the loop section, and this section here is what to do within the loop, the action, whether you want to update a record, retrieve, insert, store value. So in this example, I'm using a buffet line. And let's imagine you're at a buffet, right? And the buffet has a series of hot plates, right? Each hot plate containing its own dish. As you can see, you have a hot plate here for a salad, then you have a hot plate for roast, you have a hot plate for chicken, potatoes, and rice. Each one as in its own separate station. So we got station 1 through 5 right here, okay? Consider this icon as just the person at that particular station looking at that hot plate. So right now we have this individual with their plate looking at the salad station in the buffet line. Now, a loop is more or less the same thing. A loop, think of it as you are looking at a particular record, the record being the food station or the hot plate at that particular buffet line. You're looking at it, right? And you're observing what's at that station. That's what a loop is. So you're looping through a series of hot plates, but in methods world, you would be looking at, for example, a series of estimates, right? So we would be looping through a bunch of estimates, and each record or each estimate that you're looking at would be a different hot plate. So right here, you see we're looking at salad. And what do we observe at salad? Well, when we're at our salad station, we see we have cucumbers in the salad. So these are the ingredients, right? We have tomatoes, lettuce, dressing, eggs, and onion. So same thing for a loop. If you were to loop through a list of estimates in method, you might loop through estimate number 1 in your list, and that estimate will have different details compared to estimate number 2. Same thing in this buffet line. If we were to move this gentleman or this lady over, and I'm going to try to edit this here. Let's move this out. Let me just move this out for a sec. If we were to move this gentleman now to the next hot plate, right? The ingredients would change, right? So we would go here, and now what they're looking at is no longer a salad station. They're looking at roast. So what are the ingredients of roast? Okay, well, what do we observe when we're looking at this roast? How's the roast cooked? Well, it's cooked, let's say, medium rare. Great. What kind of roast is it? Let's say it's chuck roast, right? And what else is happening with this roast? Well, there's gravy on top of this roast. So these are all different now, I would say, characteristics of this particular hot plate that was different compared to when we were at the salad station. right? Same thing with a loop in method when we're looking at estimate number 2 now. Estimate number 2 will have a different amount. It'll have a different status. It'll have different items associated to the estimate. And you're looking at a different estimate and you're grabbing the information from that estimate within this loop. Okay. So that's the concept of a loop inside of method. Okay. Now, a loop is not going to perform anything. All it's doing is it's helping you look at that record in the list. This was something that was very confusing for me at the beginning. I thought a loop also was doing something for me. The only thing it's doing is it's saying, Yusuf, we are now at the salad station, and what I could see at the salad station are these ingredients. Yusuf, we are now at the roast station, and at this roast station, I can see the following ingredients. But it's not doing anything with these ingredients, right? So we got to tell it what to do with these ingredients. In this particular section, which is outside of the loop, this is where we would go ahead and we would grab the roast and we would add it to our plate. But how do we do that? Well, in methods world, you can do it by either updating a value, right? So we would add an action within our loop to say, within this loop, for this particular estimate that we're looking at, let's grab the values that we're finding in this estimate or at this station of roast, and let's take these ingredients and let's add it to our plate. Okay? So this is done through a separate action. Now, the actions in method, they're known as, there's a variety of actions, but the most notable ones that you would use within a loop is update fields in table, retrieve value in table, insert record into table, and then something called store value, which actually is called, I'm saying store value because it would make more sense to people who are not well versed in method. But basically you're taking a value and you're putting it in a variable, also not known as assign value to action result. So we're taking the ingredient. Let's say we want to take the ingredient of this roast and we say, okay, we want to know the type of cook that this roast is. Well, it's medium rare. Great. We're going to take the value of medium rare and we're going to assign it to a variable, also known as assign value to action result, so that we can store it in the variable and recall or reference that variable later in our logic. In this case, it's simply I'm symbolizing this in my explanation by saying we're simply taking these ingredients and we're adding it to our plate, which is something that we're doing within our loop at the buffet station, within our buffet line. I hope this helps. If I confused you, feel free to reach out to me or do a comment underneath the video, and I'll be more than happy to help you understand further within the YouTube comments or just simply through an email. I will list the email within the description of the video as well. So that's an explanation of how loops would work. Okay. Now let's apply this now within method. Okay. So in method, we're going to go to our estimates. Okay. And right here, I want to be able to loop through this grid right here and update the statuses of these two pending estimates to accepted. So how do I do that? Well, I already have a section that I've customized here to select the status that I want to update it to. I want to update it to accepted, so I'm going to put that there. But I also need a way to select the estimates that I want to change from pending to accepted. As you can see, I already have one that's in accepted, so I don't need to update it to accepted again. So let's do that. I'm going to customize this screen. I'm going to go to our standard grid. I'm going to go to the column section on the right here, and I'm going to click has a checkbox column. That's it. All right. Now we're going to hit save. The next thing I want to do is I want to review with you the logic of what I've done to update the status. So let's go ahead and click here. Oh, I didn't even put anything in. So let's do it together. The first thing we want to do is we want to store the value of what we've selected in that dropdown for the status that we wanted to change to. So let's click assign value to action result. That is that store value section that I was explaining to you within our board here. So let's go ahead and let's grab that status value, which is right here. The control in method means a control on screen. So we want to grab a value on screen. So I'm going to say status, and we're going to say result status here. Okay. Result status. All right. And then what we want to do is we want to loop through grid. So there's two actions in method. There's loop through grid and loop through table. Okay. There's also loop through attachments, but that's a separate thing. We're not going to get into that in today's video. We're going to discuss the difference between these two because these two are going to be very commonly used when you're customizing your method account. But in this case, we want to use loop through grid, and I'll explain to you why later. So we're going to use loop through grid. We're going to select the grid, which is the estimates grid. We're going to choose only select rows that are checked. Now, you can loop through all of the estimates that we saw here, but we don't want to do that because we only want to update some of the estimates that we saw that were in pending status that we want to update to accepted. So we're going to check this off. So that way the system knows only loop through the rows in the grid that are checked. So I'm going to actually comment this to say that this is the buffet. This was that buffet example that I'm talking about, right? So this is the buffet. Now what we want to do is we want to update our estimate status from pending to accepted. So we're going to use the update field in table section. All right. Now this part is the add to plate part of our example. This is our buffet, and this is what we're adding to our plate. So the loop is not actually doing anything. It's just giving us access to the list of records that we want to see and we want to update. All right. Now we want to go and we want to add to our plate, and we want to update the estimate to the particular status that we want. So this is very important here. Pay close attention. Wow, I can't talk right now. Pay close attention. All right. We're going to choose estimate. We're going to select the record ID. Whenever you're looping through something, in most scenarios, you're always going to reference the record ID. That is the method unique record ID. It's always going to be different for all estimates. This is what you need. This is its unique identifier. Now, this is where I want you to pay close attention. Look, now that we're within our loop, look what shows up. We have an entire loop section here, and it's referencing all the values for that particular estimate that we're looking at in the loop. So we're at the buffet line. We're looking at the salad station. These are all the characteristics that we're pulling of the salad. These are all the ingredients, right? What we're saying is that we want to look at, within our loop, that particular estimate. We want to update that particular estimate that the loop is looking at. So we're going to select record ID here. So we're going to go to loop, and we're going to choose record ID. So what it's saying here is take the record from the estimate table, right? We're going to compare the record ID, and we only want to update the record ID for the estimate that we're looking at in the loop. So record ID on the estimate table to record ID for the estimate in the loop. Okay? Now we're going to do that. And what do we want to update? We want to update the status. So we're going to update status here. And what do we want to update the status to? That stored value that we had already, that we pulled from the screen of the accepted status. We're going to update it here. So we're going to call back that variable, that stored value. I named it result status. You can name it whatever you'd like. Doesn't matter. I'm going to call it stored status. Okay. Now the last thing we're going to do is we're going to refresh the grid, because yes, it's updating, but it's updating on the table level, not on the grid. The grid is, think of the grid as it's displaying the values at that current point in time for that table on screen for you. But now that we're changing those values on the table level, we also want to see those changes on screen. So how do we do that? We use this refresh control action. We're refreshing that estimates grid. We're clearing all the checkboxes. We do want to reset it. Okay. And that's it. This is refreshing the estimate. Let's close this. And let's see this in action. All right. We have two estimates here. I'm going to select both of these estimates. And I'm going to update the status to accepted. We do see them in pending. Let's update them now. Click the update status button. Boom. Look, they've now changed to accepted. Method knew exactly which estimates I wanted to update from pending to accepted. And it shows now in here. If I click into one of these estimates, the status is now accepted. So that's the loop through grid. Now to conclude this video, what I want to do is I want to explain to you when is the right time to use a loop through grid and when is the right time to use a loop through table and what are the differences. A loop through table is meant for longer loops, okay? So if you want to loop through long list of records, never use a loop through grid. I would always, you can, but I know from using this platform for almost a decade that if you use a loop through grid to loop through thousands of records, it's not going to perform or it might miss some records. Okay, that's just how it works. It's best to use a loop through table for longer loops. Now, loop through table, where is it done? It's done off screen. So in the background, you're not interacting with the list on the screen like we did in our example. Okay, we're manipulating or we're updating a list of records off screen. Now, when would this be used? Let's go back to our estimate. Let's open up one of these estimates. Let's look at the create invoice button right here. If I just go behind the scenes here and we go down to our create invoice button, you'll notice there is a loop through table here. There's actually two. There's another loop through table. Now the one I'm going to focus on is this one. This is looping through your items on your estimate in the background. The reason why it's doing it is because we're stating, and I'm just going to duplicate my screen here and go back to that create invoice button. We're stating we want to create an invoice, right? Well, what do we want to do when we create it? Well, we want to see all this information now move over to an invoice. So I want to loop through this list, but I don't want to loop through a grid, right? It makes more sense for me to loop through a table because it's going to now store, it's going to take all the stored values that I have on screen here, and it's saved on the table in the background. It's going to take everything and it's going to insert it into my estimate, okay? I don't have to play around with this grid. I don't have to select which items I want to have move over. It should just take all of it. So in this case, I want to do this off screen in the background. And this is better for performance. If you can use loop through table over loop through grid, I would always recommend use loop through table. Okay. So in this case, they're clicking this button and behind the scenes in the logic of this button, it's going and it's looping through the table and is grabbing all of the items here to move over to the invoice. Now, if you only wanted certain items to move over to the invoice, you could use a loop through grid by selecting the items that you want to have move over. That's completely fine, right? You can also use a loop through table though by defining particularly which items you want to have move over every single time if you had a defined criteria. Okay? Now, going back to loop through grid is meant for shorter loops. Okay? And it's more interactive. It's on screen where you're going in and you're manually clicking the records that you want to have looped through and manipulate or update or whatever you need to do with those records. Okay? What I would say, again, just to repeat, if you can use loop through table, always use loop through table over loop through grid. All right? That concludes the end of today's video. I hope that this helps. I hope I've been able to explain clearly the differences between a loop through table and loop through grid and method. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at yusuf@craftingclouds.com. Or if you want to get on a call, I'm more than happy to get on a call. You can go to my website at www.craftingclouds.com. I'll have the links below in the description of this video. We can get on a call. We can talk about this over the phone if you'd like. Or if you want, leave a comment and I will see your comment and reply back to your comment when I have the time and I see it. Thanks everyone. I appreciate it. I hope this video helps. Have a good day.